All right. I'm Peter Alessandria, and for the next 90 minutes, I invite you to be bigger than you think you are. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Let's take a look at our agenda for this evening. As usual, we'll begin with some announcements, followed by our recommended reading. Then we'll do our affirmation of the day. Tonight's kind of special, as you'll see in a minute. Followed by introductions and victories, and we'll have an audiobook excerpt from my book, Be Bigger Than You Think You Are. Come back, work on our topic discussion, have a break at about 8:15, and then come back and work on our assignment and do some Q&A, and then wrap it up by 9 o'clock. As a reminder, today's workshop is being recorded and will be available on the BeBiggerToday.com website and YouTube channel within the next 48 hours. Please feel free to stop your video and mute your microphone if you do not wish to be seen or heard on the recording. Be Bigger Than You Think You Are, author-signed paperback, first edition, few copies left. It's a limited time offer. Save 20% by using the discount code WORKSHOP20 at checkout. You get your copy at BeBiggerToday.com/book. And while you're there, check out my New York City photo book, New York Cityscapes, the penultimate New York City photo book, collaboration between myself and 6 other New York City area photographers. We each have our own unique take on the landmarks and skyline that make New York City so great. Check it out on my website, BeBiggerToday.com/bookstore, on sale for $16.95. Check it out. Get your copy today. And this is the last week that the audiobook will be available for pre-order at $9.99. This is the unabridged version of my second edition of Be Bigger Than You Think You Are. 10 hours long. Get your copy at BeBiggerToday.com/bookstore. 10 hours, money back guarantee. If you don't love it, you get your money back, but I know you're going to love it. Check out some hats and t-shirts at BeBiggerToday.com/merch. Use the discount code MERCH20 at checkout and save 20% on your hats and t-shirts. And you can also see my original art and photography on my website at BeBiggerToday.com/art-photography. These are my original cityscape, landscape, and abstract images in a professionally framed, gallery-wrapped canvas print. So check it out on the website, and here's a little commercial for you guys. Peter's photos and abstract designs are uniquely beautiful, one-of-a-kind works of art. These gallery-wrapped canvas prints are set in a contemporary shadow box floating frame and will enhance the beauty of any home or office. Available in 4 different sizes, each piece is professionally framed and comes complete and ready to hang. Frames are available in your choice of black, white, or brown, and each is signed by the artist. Peter's original art and photography will make a great gift for a client, for yourself, or someone you love. Order yours today. And we also have refrigerator magnets. These are my original New York City photographs on refrigerator magnets. Get your set at BeBiggerToday.com/merch. They go great on any refrigerator, actually any metallic surface. And there's a total of 11 in the collection, so check it out. My latest podcast, I was a guest on What's the Difference podcast, the US-UK network. It's a great interview. We talked about overcoming our limiting thoughts and beliefs about ourselves. Go to my website at BeBiggerToday.com and then look for this image on the home page. Click on that and it will take you directly to the podcast interview on YouTube. So check that out. And I'm available for one-on-one coaching and or corporate consulting. If you're a creative person, an artist or a photographer or a writer, or if you have a business or work for a business and would like me to come in and talk to your sales team or your management team on how they can be bigger than they think they are, reach out to me through the website at BeBiggerToday.com and we'll set it up. And finally, I'm accepting donations I'm looking for support to continue to offer the workshop at no charge and keep it open to everyone. Our suggested donation is $5 per week or $20 per month. You can send your donation directly to me at paypal.me/Peter Alessandria, all one word, and thank you so much for your support. All right, so our recommended reading for tonight is a continuation of the recommended reading from last week. If you recall, we talked about P. Melody's other book called Facing Codependence. This book is Facing Love Addiction, Giving Yourself the Power to Change the Way You Love. This book was published in 1992, and it's available everywhere you get books, on Amazon. It's available as an audiobook too, I believe, on Audible. So this is another great exploration by Pia into ways we can improve the way we relate to other people. And in particular, this is about romantic love relationships and how sometimes we can get out of balance and have the challenges that many of us have in our love relationships. Love addiction is a strong word, but I think it encapsulates where she's coming from when she talks about some of this. And, the truth is, love relationships are challenging for a lot of people, myself included. And so whatever help we can get, I think is worthwhile. So in her book, she talks about both the love addict and the love avoidant. Now, the characteristics of the love addict are we assign a disproportionate amount of time, attention, and value above ourselves to the other person to whom we're addicted, and this focus often has an obsessive quality. Number two, we have unreasonable expectations for unconditional positive regard from the other person in the relationship. And three, we neglect to care for or value ourselves in the relationship. So there's a lot of parallels between what we do when we're addicted to a substance that we can do when we're addicted to another person. And so for me, it was very interesting to learn about this, to notice how I could be obsessive in some of my romantic relationships and so on, and begin to look at the role that I play in that relationship a little differently. Now, what's interesting is the other person in the relationship is typically what Pia Melody refers to as the love avoidant. And the love avoidant, they conduct life from behind a protective emotional wall, and they continually try to control the choices of other people with whom they are in relationship. So one of the characteristics is to be kind of distant or unavailable, and to also try to control the other people in the relationship. And then another characteristic is to consciously fear intimacy because they believe they will be drained, engulfed, or controlled by it. Now, what's interesting is that we can play both roles in a given relationship, or we can play one role in one relationship and another role in another relationship. So for any of us that have challenges around our intimate love relationships, it might be worth checking out this book. Again, I found it very helpful, and I actually did a week-long workshop with P. Melody in Arizona back in the day on this topic, and it was very, very helpful. So something to think about: Facing Love Addiction, Giving Yourself the Power to Change the Way You Love by P. Melody. All right, so we're going to move on to our affirmation of the day. Today's affirmation is, I choose happiness, I choose love, I choose joy. Now, you may recall that I have said several times throughout the workshops and throughout my book that I consider happiness not a feeling per se, but I consider happiness a choice, a decision. I consider love not a feeling, but a choice or a decision that we have to make. And I can say the same for joy. So I consider happiness, love, and joy decisions. Obviously, there are feelings, emotions that go along with those decisions, but I think it's helpful for me at least to understand that I have a choice to make. Happiness doesn't just happen to me. when the stars align. I must consciously and deliberately choose thoughts, feelings, words, and actions that support the emotion of happiness if I want to experience happiness. So in that way, it is a decision, a choice that I have to make. The same is true of love. Love does not just happen when the stars align. Love comes from me consciously and deliberately choosing thoughts that support the feeling of love despite what's going on around me. In the introduction to my book, I mentioned that I made the observation some years ago that the people who are truly happy in life are probably happy despite the events and circumstances of their lives rather than because of them. So for me, this supports the notion that if we want to experience joy, if we want to experience love, if we want to experience happiness, we must choose that. And the way we choose that is by the thoughts, feelings, words, and actions that we express in the world. If you may recall, last week or 2 weeks ago, I was saying if you want to know who you are, look at how you are. Are you being loving? How are you being in this moment? Are you being joyful? Are you being happy? Am I being joyful? Am I being happy? How am I expressing myself in the world? And is that in alignment with my goal of love, joy, and happiness? So these are choices, these are decisions that we have to make. And the way we do that is by consciously and deliberately thinking thoughts, feelings, words, and actions that support that within us. This is us taking our power back. This is no longer leaving our emotional state to chance or to outside forces or to other people's choices and decisions. This is something that we choose for ourselves by, as I said, consciously and deliberately thinking thoughts, feeling feelings, speaking words, and taking actions that are in alignment with that. Now, what I want to share with you guys next, I came across this on YouTube this morning. So this is a clip from YouTube, and I actually spent most of the morning, well, not most of the morning, I spent about an hour hour and a half this morning looking at different clips on YouTube where there was kind of spontaneous joy, spontaneous laughter that became contagious. So when one person was expressing joy or happiness, it became contagious. And other people, in this case, strangers on a bus in London, none of these people knew each other. They shared a moment where, well, it's kind of self-explanatory. So let me let the clip play.
Don't complain about my laughter.
No complaint.
That's it. So shut.
Is it drive or not?
He must be on the You're laughing, everybody else laughing.
Yes, of course. Why not everybody laughing? Yeah, that's a good thing. It's a good
Yeah,
thing.
keep it
Yes,
going,
Daddy.
keep it going, please.
Of course, carry on. I know. It's better than fighting, isn't it?
It's true, it's true.
Yeah. It's all right. Come on, sit here, darling. Come on, sit here. You can laugh as well.
I have no idea.
Because it's all right.
Bella
Oh,
Santarma.
don't worry, I'm not gonna bite you. You close your book now? Believe me, this book is much more important. Come on, Daddy, come on, sit down. It's all right, come on, sit down. Come on, come to Mama. It's all right, come to Mama. Come to Mama, Mama. It's all right, come to Mama. Too old for what, Daddy? You too old to have it out? What is it? What am I gonna do? I'm gonna rape you? What's the problem? 77, darling, don't worry, it's the beginning of your life, don't worry about it. It's alright, darling, believe me, you have a lovely time. Next to me, you have a lovely time, don't worry about it. Yeah, okay, darling, yeah. I live local, I live up your street, don't worry about it.
She's my mother. She's my mother.
I'm the mother.
All right, so there are literally dozens and dozens of clips on YouTube of strangers on subway trains and public places like that, where when one person starts laughing, when one person kind of lets go, other people join. Sometimes spontaneously, sometimes not. But what's really interesting, I watched all these clips this morning, which was great. I highly recommend that, actually. I was laughing my ass off. But what I want to point out is that the people who participate in this, at some level, they're choosing that. If you look closely at some of these clips, there are some people who don't participate, who sit there and and they start judging the other people. So, and we can decide what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. In this case, it seemed to be pretty good-natured. And I just love the fact that when people kind of let go, let their guard down a little bit, we can share joy with complete strangers on a bus or on a subway or wherever we are. And it just takes that choice, making that decision in that moment, choosing happiness, choosing joy, choosing to experience love with complete strangers. And I love it. I'm gonna spend at least one day each week in the morning, spend a little time watching videos like this. Another favorite that I discovered this morning is little babies laughing. So if you go on YouTube, you'll find clip after clip after clip of infants and toddlers just laughing their ass off. And it was just, I couldn't help but laugh along with them. It was great. The other thing, if you watch that clip closely, the gentleman on the right who gets up and gives his seat up, he's holding a book. And that book is Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that we covered in the workshop a few weeks ago. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. So spend a half hour in the morning watching clips on YouTube of people, strangers, complete strangers, laughing their asses off together. So now is the time for introductions and victories. This is an opportunity for anybody who's new to introduce themselves, or if you'd like to share a victory or celebration from the past week, now's a chance to do that. So just unmute yourself and go ahead and say hi. Let us know what's going on. Barb.
Kind of a victory. It just seems so ironic. You know my story that was going on with this. Someday I don't know, with the bulletin. So I did my thing on Saturday, and as I was doing that, something came to me. I thought I remembered the person that I took over with the previous job. I think she said something about being trained or something with the bulletin company. So something in the back of my mind reminded me of that. So Monday, I give the bulletin company a call, the one I used previously. And I just said, I'm struggling with this, or the person I'm working with is having a hard time with me. I was never formally trained. what can, I'm asking you for help. She says, well, do you want George to train you? And I said, yes, that would be great. So George is coming Tuesday at 10 o'clock to train me on the bulletin. And I was like, duh, I've been suffering for 3 years and all of a sudden George is going to come and train me. Okay, so that's my victory. Isn't, no matter how many times I go over it, Peter, I sit there and go, why didn't I think of this before? Why did it happen before? And, everybody's going to say, because it wasn't supposed to be. It was like a divine light bulb. And I just think it's hysterical. So that's my victory, I guess.
Well, that's huge. That's great.
That's huge.
Right?
I mean, really. I mean, George, it was just, yeah, woo-hoo. How huge was that?
That's great.
Oh.
But I'm going to suggest that you play a more active role in that than you might realize.
Okay, how?
Well, just think about your shift in your attitude, your shift in how you see yourself. I think remember, we talked about this a few weeks ago, we are like, if you study the law of attraction work, they talk a lot about this. We're like little radio stations, and we put out signals, and we attract to us what's in alignment with those signals. The stuff that comes to us, it's based on our vibration. It's based on our mental and emotional state. So by being a little more, this is take what you like and leave the rest. In fact, I'm not even going to talk about you. I'm going to talk about me. I noticed that when I shift, I had a very similar experience recently. And when I worked backwards, I could see, wow, I had changed my attitude towards that person in that situation. And I had been moving from feeling like a victim and seeing myself as a victim to beginning to take my power back and to recognize that I played a part in the situation as it was in that moment. And I began to think about ways I could change how I was responding to that situation. And then I had something very, very similar, just kind of come. It was like, wow, how come that was never there before? Where did that come from?
That's exactly how I felt. And yet it was there all the time.
Right. And so that's something to recognize, because what happens is our attitude, the vibe that we're putting out there, how we see ourselves, who we think we are, literally blocks those possibilities from coming to us. It's like we can't see it because it's not in alignment with who we think we are, who we think they are, and how we think things have to go. Our expectations are very, very powerful. And an expectation is basically a mental thought process. It involves beliefs and attitudes. And, we basically get what we expect. So I'm going to suggest, maybe it's divine intervention, and maybe it's Barb is beginning to shift how she relates to the world. And so she's getting some new experiences coming to her.
Okay, I'll go for that. Okay, thanks.
Beautiful. Good work.
All right, thanks.
Tell George I said hi.
Yeah, he's going to have a challenge on his hand, but I will.
Well, remember, you get to decide. It could go. It could go very easily.
I'm sure it will be, because I think I know a lot more than I think I know. No, I know. I think I know a lot. So it's going to go very well. All the pieces will come together.
Excellent. That's a perfect affirmation.
Okay. So that's
Good
what
job.
I'll tell myself. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's all everything, it goes very easily. Everything falls into place. It goes perfectly. I get what I need to get from it. It benefits me and my employer. You can come up with all kinds of positive affirmations around that.
Okay. Yeah, because I was definitely bummed by the whole thing. So I have to put a positive spin on that for sure.
You're bummed out? You're getting the help that you need and you're bummed out?
No, I was bummed out that, what they said to me. But, again, I got to stop. No, when they, approached me and said, it's not working.
But that was then, and now you're taking action, which you never know. I mean, this there's the other thing, everything that I learned way back when, all of that stuff has helped me as I move forward in my life. So it may end up that what you learn now with George, you might take to the next job.
I know, or just the next level. I know. I have been looking, so I know that's out there. Yes, definitely. There's something better out there for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe this is preparation for that.
Okay.
I mean, the point is you don't really know, and you get to focus, you could focus on either, the unpleasant experience that got you here, or you can look at this as an opportunity. Hey, either it's going to help me in my current job or it may help me in the future. And I can be grateful for that. And guess what? It took an unpleasant situation to ask to be open to that help. So in that way, the unpleasantness served you to move forward now. Yeah.
I know. Because I always think that, I'm open to ask for help, but you know what? We may not be. This is certainly proof positive that I wasn't looking in the right direction. So, okay. Yep. I'm happy.
Well, and sometimes we talked about this too. We'd rather be right than happy.
Okay.
So, and the way that we're right often, unfortunately, is by making somebody else wrong. And again, I shared about this, I think, in chapter 4 or 5. For a long time, I did not allow myself to be happy around a certain person because I wanted them to know how much they had hurt me. And it was my way of punishing them, but I was really punishing myself. So I'm not saying that's true of you or anybody else, but I did that. I'm pretty clear on that now, that I sacrificed my own happiness to be right about somebody else being wrong.
I got to remember that, because I'm saying that. I'm finding it very hard to work with these people. I feel like I turned off to them, and I can't do that. Just what you just said made a lot of sense. Just be happy and be yourself, and, it would make all the difference. Okay, I got to work on that.
Well, and remember, this is what we started off with the affirmation today. We have a choice, and happiness is a decision. Love is a decision. Joy is a decision. If we're sitting around waiting for the world to make us happy, we are fucked.
Yeah. Why can't it make us happy?
Here's the thing, guys. This is about taking our power back. This is about being the conscious creator of our lives. This is about taking responsibility for our lives. We must choose, and I'm not saying it's easy. It's simple, and it's definitely simple, but not easy. And I'm not making anybody wrong who doesn't do this, including myself, because I still struggle with this. But it's my firm belief that, love, happiness, joy, all the things we say we want, we must choose those things. We must make a decision. And that involves consciously and deliberately putting aside all the negative thoughts about what assholes they are. I'll bleep that out as well. What they did to us, how unfair life is, how come I can never get ahead. I mean, all of that stuff that's why we're reprogramming. Because it's that stuff that blocks our happiness. It's not what they're doing or not doing. It's not what they did or didn't do. It's our thoughts about it that are blocking it. Our thoughts lead to our feelings, and then our feelings lead to our words and actions, and our words and actions lead to what we experience in life.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure this is a big thing. I know this is a big thing. I think, I think that, it is. It's an amazing, the more than, George, it's the fact that I pursued it and I found an answer, and I, kind of shoved it right up their nose. So, okay, I'm happy with that.
Good.
Okay.
Good work.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else want to say hi or share a victory? Okay, so let us move ahead then. So we are still working on Chapter 7. Last week we had our first discussion about boundaries. Tonight is part 2 of that discussion. We may have one more week next week on healthy boundaries. So if you weren't here last week, please watch that video. A lot of great information, and basically that builds on what we're going to talk about tonight, or what we're talking about tonight builds on what we did last week. All right, so we're going to listen to the audiobook excerpt tonight. This is a long one. It's going to be about 15 minutes, but I couldn't figure out another way to do it. And it includes a real-life example from my own life. So I'm going to play that now, and then when we come back, we'll jump into our discussion. So hang on.
In his best-selling book, Pulling Your Own Strings, the late Wayne Dyer says we teach other people how it's okay to treat us. We let them know what's acceptable or not in terms of our relationship with them. So for instance, if we allow our boss to be constantly disrespectful of us in front of other people, we're sending her a message that that's okay. It may not be appropriate to interrupt her midstream, although it might be depending on the nature of her comments, but certainly afterwards we'd want to raise the issue. Ultimately, if this behavior continues, it would be up to us to pursue whatever steps are necessary to take care of ourselves. Taking responsibility for our lives means being conscious of the messages we send to others regarding what will be tolerated or not in the relationship. In my own life, I've found that the closer I am to someone, the more I need to have healthy boundaries with them. Boundaries with strangers or acquaintances are usually much simpler compared to boundaries with family, friends, and lovers. Strong emotional attachments can make it difficult to set healthy dividing lines between people. Yet this is exactly why we need them. Moreover, emotional enmeshment, such as minding other people's business, feeling overly responsible for their emotional well-being, having a history of rescuing, saving, or enabling them, etc., can all make setting healthy boundaries difficult, if not impossible. We want to be close to the people we love without becoming overly enmeshed in their lives. This is especially true of adults with other adults. Having healthy boundaries promotes genuine love and intimacy, whereas enmeshment erodes those things. Also, a long history of interactions usually means certain patterns and expectations are already firmly established. Thus, as I mentioned earlier, not everyone may be happy when we try to change the rules. In fact, they may not be happy even when we're only changing ourselves. People tend to prefer that the same person they know shows up day after day, year after year. Unhealthy people don't like change, either in themselves or others. Many years ago, when I first began exploring the idea of having better boundaries with certain people in my life, I just assumed they would automatically respect those boundaries. I went out of my way to let them know what I considered okay or not okay in the relationship, often being quite detailed and specific. I was trying to impress upon them how fair and thoughtful I was being about all this. The responses I got were as follows. Sometimes the other person was emphatic in their agreement, claiming they fully understood. Other times they were less understanding and even a little skeptical. And in at least one case, the other person just kind of stared at me blankly, eventually wandering off shaking their head in disbelief. That should have been a clue for me. Yet, regardless of how explicit I was in stating my boundary, or how emphatic the other person was in their agreement, in every case my boundaries were transgressed and or discarded entirely by the other person. As you might imagine, this was quite frustrating and not a little confusing. I tried so hard to be clear as to what I thought the new rules should be. And when someone agreed, didn't that mean they were obligated to play by those rules? Yet all my boundaries ended up being ignored. I was perplexed. Then one day I realized these were all my rules, not the other person's. They had no investment in seeing things my way. Moreover, even if they said yes, once they figured out my way was not so good for them, the game was over. But it gets worse. I eventually saw I was trying to use my boundaries to control somebody else's behavior. Because I was using a fancy word like boundaries, I thought it was okay. But trying to control another person is trying to control another person, no matter what you call it. Thus, when the other person finally caught on, they lost interest, or worse. So then I thought, what the heck good is it to have boundaries if the other person isn't going to listen, and if I'm really just trying to control them anyway? What could possibly be the point? Then it hit me. My boundaries are for me, not other people. In their purest form, boundaries set limits on my behaviors, not the other person's. They're guidelines I establish for myself, what I'm willing to accept or not accept, regardless of how the other person sees them. This also means it's up to me to enforce my boundaries with myself, not with another person. This is the most important thing I've learned about boundaries and the toughest thing for most people to understand. So let me give you an example from my own life. The story of Stan. This is a story about a former legal client of mine. Let's call him Stan. Stan was, and I'm sure still is, a super nice guy. He's also what most people would call an idea man. Lots of big ideas about how to make things better for everyone. Shortly after I started working with him, Stan also referred another client to me, an out-of-state company that soon became my biggest client. This is the company I mentioned in the introduction. Thus, Stan was responsible, directly or indirectly, for probably 90% of my income at the time. While I was very grateful for this, I was also very challenged in my relationship with Stan. For instance, because I felt so dependent on his business, I found it very difficult to say no to him. I was afraid of doing anything I thought might upset or disappoint him. I also felt like it was my job to make sure everything was okay for him. While perhaps more pronounced with Stan, these issues were not unique to him. I had similar issues with other relationships, both business and personal. Now, Stan was a bit of a night owl. His workday often extended well past normal business hours. For many years when I was practicing law, I worked from home. Knowing that I worked from home, he didn't hesitate to call me, even relatively late at night. For a while, this was kind of okay, but eventually our pay structure changed, making these late-night calls less lucrative for me. Beyond that, however, I was beginning to feel the pressure of having poor emotional and psychological boundaries with him. Getting these late-night calls only made that worse. Now, before I go any further, I want to be clear that while Stan certainly had a part in everything that transpired, my experience of the situation was about me, not him. I was in charge of my thoughts, feelings, words, and actions, though, as you'll see in a minute, I had no idea about this at the time. With all my clients, I wanted to be empathetic, I wanted to be helpful, and most of all, I wanted them to get good results. But I didn't know anything about separating my work life from my personal life, and I didn't know anything about not becoming enmeshed in someone else's problems. It was also around this time that I started learning about codependency. As such, I was faced with a growing and often uneasy awareness that I might be codependent in all my relationships, including the one I had with Stan. The end result was it became increasingly difficult to take his late-night phone calls. Even before learning about codependency, I knew these calls were not serving me. I could feel in my gut something was off. On top of that, they often weren't even necessary. There was usually nothing so pressing that it couldn't wait until the next day during normal business hours. As my angst grew, I realized I had to do something with respect to these calls. So I resolved to bring it up the next time we spoke. This proved to be more difficult than I thought. As I mentioned, I was reticent about doing anything I thought might upset or disappoint him. He was responsible for 90% of my income, after all. Yet finally, mostly out of desperation, I mustered the courage. At the end of one of our daytime calls, I explained to him, in a very calm and even tone, that while I certainly valued his business and our relationship, I was trying to establish more normal working hours for myself. This meant that even though I worked from home, it would be better for me if he called before 7 p.m. I felt like this was a reasonable compromise, as opposed to 5 p.m., given his propensity to work at night. When I shared this with him, he seemed to understand, and he even appeared to acquiesce. However, as I soon found out, my time boundary didn't mean squat to him. For the first couple of weeks, everything was fine. We spoke during the day and stuff got done. But then one night around 9 p.m., the phone rang. Now, this was so long ago that it was before we had caller ID on our phones. This meant I had no way of knowing who was calling unless I actually answered. But having had that wonderful conversation with him about not calling me at night, I convinced myself it couldn't be him. Except when I answered, it was. He immediately started the conversation by saying, "I know I'm not supposed to call after 7, but this is really important." Despite my initial shock and confusion, and perhaps because I felt guilty that I had requested the boundary in the first place, I can still, 25 years later, feel guilty when I put my needs ahead of someone else's. I acquiesced and proceeded to let him ramble on for 45 minutes about something which it turned out was not at all important. When we finally hung up, I felt terrible. It was a mix of anger, rage, and disgust. I tried my best to let it go and foolishly convinced myself he wouldn't be calling me at night again. All was quiet for another week or so. Then one night the phone rang. It was 9:25 p.m. I immediately had a sinking feeling. I considered letting it switch over to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. He started by saying the same thing. I know I'm not supposed to call after 7, but... My blood began to boil. I felt hot with rage all over. I couldn't focus on what he was saying. I was so mad. Yet I didn't know what to say or do. This wasn't in the book I had read on setting boundaries. I just assumed people would automatically respect my wishes once they knew about them. When we finally hung up, my mind was still racing. What the F was going on? Why does he keep calling me at night after I told him not to? Looking back, I can see this relationship was codependency 101. I had no idea how enmeshed I was with him. We knew a lot about each other's personal lives, but it was more the emotional caretaking I was doing with him that was creating all my problems. I thought it was my job to make him feel okay. For instance, if he had a business problem that was troubling him, it was up to me to resolve it. That may not seem so abnormal in the context of an attorney-client relationship. But without going into all the details, the way in which the problems kept coming and the way I was handling them went beyond a normal working relationship. I was also a devoted people pleaser and couldn't grasp that it was all right for me to say no if something wasn't working for me. Thus, the problems kept coming and coming and coming. I remember not sleeping well the night of that second call. The next day when I awoke, I realized it was up to me to somehow enforce my boundaries with him. But I had no idea what that meant or how to do it. Now, in Stan's defense, I had trained him how it was okay to treat me. We had a long history during which I had proved over and over that I was willing to drop everything to attend to his needs. And to his credit, for a while at least, he was willing to pay for this kind of service. But as I said, the monetary arrangement had changed, and now, money or not, this kind of interaction was no longer working for me. It soon became clear that I had created this monster, no offense, Stan, and now I had to find a way to deal with it. Over the next couple of days, I pondered all this. Do I drop him as a client? Do I not answer my phone after 7? Do I talk to him again about my boundaries? No clue what to do. That's when I realized what I mentioned earlier. My boundaries were for me, not other people. This meant that if he called again after 7 p.m., it was my job to nip the conversation in the bud and get off the phone. I shuddered at the thought of prematurely ending our conversation like that, but what other choice did I have? I wouldn't have to wait long to find out. A couple of nights later, the phone rang. It was 9:28 p.m. I immediately knew it was Stan. For a moment, I hesitated, yet I also realized I couldn't go on like this. I had to face my demons. So I took a deep breath and answered the phone. Hello? Peter, it's Stan. Hey, sorry to call so late, but I felt a surge of adrenaline, then I cut him off. Stan, hang on a minute. He stopped, probably more out of surprise than anything else. I was aware my body was trembling. You know, I've asked you not to call after 7 p.m. I told you I want to have a personal life. I paused, but he said nothing, so I continued. You said you understood, yet here you are calling me again late at night. Another small pause, and again he said nothing. I'm guessing he was too dumbfounded to speak, since this was very unlike me. All of a sudden I became aware my heart was pounding in my chest, but I continued. Now, if this is truly an emergency, I suggest you call 911. I have no idea where that came from. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you to call me back tomorrow during my regular business hours, and we can discuss whatever you need to then. I stopped. My hands were shaking and my heart was now pounding up in my throat. There was a long silence during which I thought I might actually die. But then I heard him say, Okay, I'll give you a call tomorrow. Have a good night. And he hung up. I was in shock. Total disbelief, actually. I stared at the phone in my hand for a few moments. I think I was afraid to hang up in case he might still be there. There was also probably a body reflex that says a phone call with Stan can't be this short. After a few more moments, I finally put the phone down. I could still feel my heart beating, but everything else was quiet. Even the voice in my head had stopped. Then it hit me. I had done it. I had finally faced my fears and actually stood up for myself. And it worked. I was so happy I thought I might cry. What followed over the next few hours and days were continually alternating waves of relief followed by waves of guilt and remorse. I was relieved to have finally stood up for myself, yet I feared I had alienated my star client. And as I said, Stan was a genuinely nice person. This made it even more difficult for me to set a boundary with him by putting myself first. But I could also see that if I felt guilty when I put my needs ahead of someone else's, I had more work to do. Stan never called again after 7 p.m. Our professional relationship continued for another year or so, but something definitely changed that night. I began to see myself and all my relationships differently. When Stan and I eventually called it quits, I was most grateful for my time with him. It had been the perfect opportunity to learn that I was the one who was responsible for my own unhappiness. I did this by consistently letting all the things I didn't like slip by. I was also the one who taught him how it was okay to treat me, and I paid a huge price for that. Yet to this day, I still have great appreciation for what I learned during my time with Stan, and I certainly wish him all the best.
All right, so that's the audiobook excerpt for tonight. One of my favorite parts of the book, actually. And so, obviously this relates to our discussion that we've been having in terms of setting boundaries with other people. And I think that story, it still speaks to me about the importance of me taking care of myself and not holding other people accountable for my failure to stand up for myself, for my failure to set healthy boundaries. So the first point to cover tonight is, what I said at the beginning, which is we treat other people how it's okay to treat us. We teach other people how it's okay to treat us. We teach other people how it's okay to treat us. And that's really, really important because in relationships, it works, it's a two-way street. We each have a part in the relationship. And so if something isn't working for me, which is the whole point of this discussion of boundaries, then it's my job to set and enforce that boundary. It's my job to let the other person know that that's not okay. So as I said here, taking responsibility for our lives means being conscious of the messages we send to others regarding what will be tolerated or not in the relationship. So we have a part to play in every relationship and in every situation that challenges us. And the part that we play is to, number one, is to be conscious of the messages that we're sending, and number two is to take responsibility for our part in that situation. Because it's not all somebody else's, it's never, in my experience, somebody else's fault if there's a problem, if there's a conflict in the relationship. So this is the first thing, is to notice, okay, so I have been sending this message to my boss, to my girlfriend, to my family, to my clients, that it's okay for them to treat me or interact with me in a certain way. And then I have to take a step back and say, okay, if this is not working for me, then it's my job to set that right, to let them know the new rules, the new guidelines, what I am willing to accept in that situation. But unfortunately, that's only the first part of it. Because what happens is, this is also good. Boundaries with strangers or acquaintances are usually much simpler compared to boundaries with family, friends, and lovers. Strong emotional attachments can make it difficult to set healthy dividing lines between people. Yet this is exactly why we need them. So I alluded to this last week, and that is to say the closer we are to somebody, the more we need to have healthy boundaries with them. Again, setting boundaries with strangers, setting boundaries with acquaintances, people we don't spend a lot of time with, I think is relatively easy in most cases compared to the situation where we have a long-standing and emotionally deep relationship with somebody. And, especially if that relationship has been ongoing. So we have expectations of them, they have expectations of us. We have sent them messages about how it's okay to treat us, how it's okay to interact with us, what we will accept and what we will not accept. And so it's often difficult if we try to change that in midstream. And, the other thing is, we associate intimacy, love, romance with closeness, being close to people. which is great. That's the joy of having intimate relationships. And yet, to keep that closeness sane and healthy and functional, we do need to have boundaries. We need to have dividing lines between us and them. And, it's different for different people, obviously, in different relationships. But I have found for me in my own life that, and maybe the challenge for me is that, the more I think I love somebody, the less willing I am to take care of myself or to put myself first. See, I think loving somebody means putting them first. But when I put somebody else first, it usually means I'm not taking care of myself. And if I'm not taking care of myself, then I'm not bringing the best of me to that relationship or that situation. And I will often blame them for that. Yet the problem was not them, what they did or didn't do. It was me not taking care of myself, not putting myself first. Look, it could be as simple as, getting enough sleep or eating when I need to eat, as opposed to dropping everything and taking my niece someplace where she wants to the mall with her friends or whatever. If I don't put myself first, and if I don't take care of myself and do what I need to do so I'm in the best condition I can be in when I'm spending time with somebody else, then I'm going to probably not be, the best I could be in that situation. And I may actually blame them for how I'm feeling. So this is why I say it's really important to have that sense of it's okay to take care of myself, which often means setting a boundary and saying, you know what, I can't do this at all. I can't do this now. I prefer not to do this now. I can do it later. I could do it at 4 o'clock, or I could do it tomorrow afternoon. Or maybe it's, I prefer not to do this at all. You'll have to find another way to get to the mall, or whatever it is. So, and that's hard with the people that we love because we want them to feel good. We want to do nice things for them. We want them to like us. See, here's the other thing, and as a codependent, this is one of my biggest fears in life. When I say no, or when I set a boundary, or when I'm not willing to do something that somebody else wants me to do, I run the risk of them not liking me, not approving of me. And, for a long time in my life, that was a fate worse than death. Somebody not liking me, somebody not approving of me. So that's part of the reticence that I find in myself, and I see this in other people when it comes to setting boundaries. And again, the primary purpose of a boundary is to take care of ourselves in our relationships. And so I have to navigate that. I have to now see myself differently, where, number one, I'm not dependent on other people liking me for me to feel good about myself. And number two, run the risk of disappointing somebody or even aggravating somebody or whatever. And that's when I get to put on my adult pants and negotiate and say, gee, I can't do this now, or I prefer not to do this now, but I can do it now, later, or whatever. And we negotiate and we find a way, common ground that works for both of us. All right. And then, this is the biggest point. This was the biggest aha moment for me, probably in my entire, navigating the topics we've been discussing in this book, certainly in terms of understanding boundaries. And that was, and this is the example I gave with Stan in the audiobook a few moments ago, understanding that my boundaries are for me. They're not for other people. It's what I've discovered for me is that it's actually insane for me to expect other people to respect my boundaries. It's unreasonable, and it could be, insane for me to actually believe that. And what I found for me, as I said again in the audiobook, I was using my boundaries to try to control somebody else's behavior. But what I recognized was, just because I'm using a fancy word like boundaries, I'm still trying to control somebody else's behavior, and control is control. And, it may be trying to manipulate them. I may be trying to seduce them or to sweet talk them or persuade them into seeing things my way, and doing what I want them to do, which is basically what we're saying here. And yet I found that for me, that usually didn't work very well, especially once they realized that my way was not the best way for them. So all the sweet talking and or threatening and or controlling and or manipulating that I thought I was doing, often backfired, and they ended up ignoring those boundaries anyway. So that's when I realized that my boundaries were for me, not other people. We talked about this in chapter 2 and chapter 3. We are powerless over other people, period, end of conversation. At least the way we define power. In chapter 3, I define true power, as the ability to consciously choose and or change our thoughts, feelings, words, and actions. And I also said in that chapter that we are powerless. We do not have the ability to choose or change somebody else's thoughts, feelings, words, or actions. If they go along with our way, then they're choosing that for themselves. I am not making somebody change their behavior, change the way they think, the way they feel. If they change, it's because they're choosing to. Doesn't mean we don't negotiate. It doesn't mean we don't let people know what's working for us and what's not working for us. That's all part of a healthy relationship. Sharing, what our needs might be, although it's nobody else's job to meet my needs. But that's part of the relationship. We talk about stuff, we communicate, we negotiate. So this means we can't control what other people say or do. But again, we're not powerless over ourselves. We always have the ability to choose what we think, feel, say, and do. So the example from the audiobook tonight was in that moment when I realized that if I was not happy with getting those phone calls late at night from Stan, then it was up to me to nip that conversation in the bud and to change who I was being in that moment. All up until that point, I was always trying to change who he was in the moment. But as I just said, true power is the ability to change our thoughts, feelings, words, and actions, not somebody else's. So I was actually more, even than trying to change him, I was hoping and wishing that he would just kind of get with the program. And that was insanity. That was unreasonable. It certainly didn't work. So I had to change my thoughts, feelings, words, and actions when I was enforcing that boundary. And if I don't want to get phone calls late at night from a client, it's up to me to get off the phone. And as I said in the reading tonight, there was a moment there where I didn't know if I was going to make it. I had so much fear around that, and my heart was pounding, and I was lightheaded, and my hands were shaking, and I wasn't sure I was going to make it. But once I took that action, once I set that boundary and enforced it with myself, everything changed. The relationship changed, how I related to other people changed. I mean, that was a seminal moment for me. I still have challenges even, 30 years later, 25 years later, standing up for myself, taking care of myself. But that was the beginning. I think that was one of the first major hurdles for me. And when I stepped through that fear, when I took that action and stepped through that fear, everything began to change. So I offer that to you guys as a possibility as well. So if you're having trouble in setting boundaries in relationships and all of that, hoping and wishing that the other person is going to change probably is not going to work. And communicating, what works for you and what doesn't work for you is the first step, but it's often not enough, or it may not be enough. So then the second step is to actually enforce that boundary with yourself. with myself. All right? So my boundaries are for me, not other people. Once I really began to understand and appreciate that, everything changed. All right, so and that's the exercise, the assignment for tonight. My boundaries are for me, not other people. Do you agree or disagree, and why? So we'll talk about that when we come back from the break. If you're new here, we're going to play a song. It's a 5-minute break. This song is Love My Life by Robbie Williams. The lyrics are going to be on screen. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to play the song on YouTube because of copyright issues, so you'll have to get a copy of the song. Ironically, you can listen to it on YouTube, but I can't put it up on YouTube. The record label they put it up there, so you can listen to it or get a copy from Amazon Music or iTunes, wherever you get music. So lyrics are on screen. Sing along with your microphone muted, and see you in 5 minutes. All right, so we are back, and let's, again, the assignment for tonight. So my boundaries are for me, not other people. Do you agree or disagree? Why? And again, I just want to emphasize, this is not easy stuff. I certainly didn't learn this as a kid, not to in any way speak negatively of my upbringing or anything like that. It's just, there's not a lot of discussion out there, from what I can see at least, that number one, the way we take care of ourselves and our relationships is by having boundaries, and then number two, that those boundaries are really for us, not for other people. I see a lot of, in my own life, in my past, trying to make other people behave a certain way so I could feel safe, so I could feel secure, so I could feel loved in the relationship. So now that puts the onus on me. That puts the responsibility back on me to say, this is what I'm willing to accept, this is what I'm not willing to accept, and this is what I'm going to do about it. So who wants to kick us off here? Who has some ideas on this?
No, it's great advice. If you really think about it, we've all been in those situations. As we said, something about me recently, something can take you over so much that, here you are talking about that you thought you were going to die. Kidding around. But just think about, what do we call it? The physical something that happens when we're in that kind of dilemma. I bet you still feel the pain if you really go back there and think about it. And it's just, so it's great advice. It's boundaries. And I guess, like you're saying, if we work all this, be bigger than we are, we shouldn't have a problem in then expressing boundaries. We should, it's easier said than done, but we shouldn't have to go through that physical dilemma. I think, in my situation recently, I was like, I called it a gut punch, but I must have sat for 2 hours and didn't even move. What is that all about? How can we get so physically, I don't know, what's the word, Peter? So physically?
Well, stuck. But that just speaks to the relationship between our emotional state and our physical state.
Yeah.
But remember, our emotional state stems from our mental state. So our thoughts and our perceptions create those emotions. And those emotions are expressed through the body. And by the way, I really did think I might die. It was...
to say that out loud, pretty amazing. Yeah.
So there are some serious consequences, side effects, whatever you want to call them, to our mental and emotional activity on our physical state. Again, if you remember in chapter 4, we talked a lot about this. I said I define fear as an emotional response to perception of ourselves as powerless and or unlovable in a given situation. And I talked all about what an emotional response is. Emotion, energy in motion. And it's actually energy in our body can either be elevated. This is, again, I always say we want to elevate our emotional state. We want to change our state. If I'm walking around depressed or angry or sad, I'm not going to be able to create the life I want. I'm not going to be able to take those actions, speak those words, take those actions to bring those outcomes that I want. So we have to change our emotional state, but the way we change our emotional state is by changing our mental state. Thoughts lead to feelings. Feelings lead to words and actions. So the thoughts come first. And it's not always, sometimes it's a perceptual thing. It's some kind of mental thing. It's not always a conscious thought, which makes it a little confusing. Sometimes, so what's a perception? I see somebody who reminds me of that kid that beat me up in the 3rd grade, and I have a reaction. I'm not really thinking in my head, oh, that guy reminds me of that kid, but there's some perception, there's some perceptual mental process that precedes the feeling, and then the feeling comes, and then the words and actions follow. So what we want to do, we often are not aware of the thought or the perception that's creating the feeling, but what we can do, and again, I talk about this in chapter 2, we want to work backwards. So we work backwards and say, gee, in that situation this afternoon with my client, I was feeling really insecure and I was feeling really defensive. What was that about? And then to work backwards. Well, what are the thoughts that I had to be thinking to create that feeling of insecurity or defensiveness? And the thought that I might have been thinking, because this is an old thought for me, is that I'm really not that good at what I do, or I'm not good enough, my work isn't very good, I'm going to disappoint people, I let people down, and so on. And so that's the thought behind the thought. That's the subconscious thought that's actually pressed down in my subconscious. So I'm not even really aware of it, yet that's what's running my life. So when I have an interaction with a client and I end up being defensive and feeling insecure, and because I haven't done any work on myself and I haven't read my own book, I'm convinced it's because of him, that client, that I feel the way I feel. And I'm saying, no, that's not true. I feel the way I feel because of how I see myself, who I think I am in that situation. And I'm probably not even consciously aware of it because it's so old and it's so painful to think of myself as not good enough that as a child, this is a defense mechanism that we do as children. We repress, we push down, we dissociate from those negative thoughts and beliefs about ourselves. It's so painful to think of myself as not good enough, which is really saying I'm not worth being loved the way I am. So I push that down, I'm no longer aware of it, and yet that subconscious thought, that belief about me, how I see myself, who I think I am, is running my life 40 years later, and I'm sitting there thinking, it's because that guy is a jerk that I feel the way I feel. And I'm saying, no, that's not the truth. That's not what's happening. I feel the way I feel because of how I see myself, the thoughts and beliefs that I have about me. That's what's, quote unquote, making me feel the way I feel. Now, it's not to say that this other person is not inappropriate. It's not to say that he's not a jerk or whatever. I'm not making excuses for what may or may not be inappropriate behavior on his part. But it's still not his fault that I feel the way I feel. And once I realize that, now I can take my power back. I get my power back and I say, I can choose. Remember, we started off the workshop tonight with the affirmation. I choose love. I choose joy. I choose happiness. I can choose to feel good no matter what he says or does. That's true power. That's us taking our power back, and that's us creating our lives instead of having our lives be the result of what we think somebody else thinks about us or what somebody else said or did that offends our ego. And now it's no longer about me creating my life. It's about me feeling sorry for myself or thinking that that guy's a a-hole or whatever, and giving all that my mental attention and not moving forward with my life, not doing what I need to do to get to where I say I want to be. Because I'm giving all my time and attention to something that's not even really true. And it's the mind of a 5-year-old. And ultimately, the way we undo all of this, which is the ego is always the part of us that's offended. The ego is always the part of us that takes things personally. The ego, which we talked about in the last chapter for a month and a half, is the part of us that wants to get even, and wants to be right instead of being happy. That's what we have to undo, and the way we undo that is by forgiveness. Now, we still have a few more weeks to talk about what forgiveness is. We got a little taste of that 2 weeks ago. We're going to talk more about it going forward. But the way we undo all of that whole mess that I just described, is through forgiveness. It's a long answer to your short question.
Yeah, no, it was a great answer. No, I feel it. It's, and then, if I look back at who I used to be, there would have been, I could sit there and, like I said, not move for 2 hours, but I probably wouldn't have slept that night. I probably would have gone through the next day with a problem. It could, and it's not like that anymore. So what you were just saying, Peter, is where you're at, and it's wonderful. And it's half the people that, you talk about the books to read and all that. Everybody's experienced this, and they're all trying to just share it with other people so they can move forward. And I think that was a wonderful answer. I got it.
Great. Good.
So I'm giving it back to you. I got it.
Oh, I knew you would.
Okay.
Good stuff. All right, great. You want to say anything else about boundaries? It takes practice. It really does take practice.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm
So
sure
just
it does.
baby steps. Just baby steps.
Yeah, because they're not shields. They're not saying, okay, you can't come any further. You can't do this. You can't do that. It all has to do with me and what I will accept. So I will, I will have to work on that. Boundaries are something you have to work on.
Yeah, and I think I said this last week, boundaries are not necessarily walls. People think that they're walls. What I'm suggesting, they could be. It really depends on the situation. We may have to, figuratively and or literally divorce ourselves from certain people in our lives because they really are inappropriate. They really are abusive. They really are harmful to us. So in that case, the wall, the boundary, the wall as a boundary may be okay. But in many cases, I found for me that as I change how I see myself, as I begin to believe that I can take care of myself, even with difficult people, I need the walls less, and the boundaries become what I talked about last week. They become permeable in that they let information in and out. So we let, some comes through, not all of it. We take in what's helpful or relevant, but we keep out what may be meant to be, harmful or, trying to get our goat or to, whatever. We keep that out. And the boundaries can also be flexible. So the example that I gave last week was in terms of, I use time boundaries a lot with people. So with certain people, I spend so many minutes on the phone or in person or whatever, and I try to be conscious of that. But it's not a rigid thing. It's not like, okay, I have 15 minutes with this person on the phone, and at 15 minutes and 1 second, I hang up the phone. I can be flexible. If the conversation's going well, I can spend a little bit more time. But if the conversation's not going well, I don't stick around for 15 minutes. It's my job to take care of myself, to enforce my boundaries, which means perhaps getting off the phone earlier, sooner than 15 minutes or whatever it is. So having those time boundaries, and understanding that they can be flexible, understanding that our boundaries can be permeable. But, again, the more I see myself as being able to take care of myself, which means no longer seeing myself as that little 5-year-old kid who is, or in this case, the little 9-year-old. He stays on my desk now.
I know, very nice.
I can see myself more as an adult now, so I can take care of myself. So I don't have to be so defensive, and I don't have to be so rigid and reactive. And remember, we talked so much about the difference between reacting and responding. So we have all kinds of tools now where we don't have to repeat the same patterns that we've been doing for the last 40 years. And that's where freedom is, and that's where we become powerful, and that's where we become the conscious creators of our lives. And that's where we have different experiences in the world, and we have different relationships and different outcomes. See, most of my life I thought everybody else had to change, and then I could have the life that I wanted. And it's like, no, nobody has to change except me. And I can do that. See, I didn't think, again, chapter 1, most of us think we can't change. We say, that's just the way I am, or you can't teach an old dog new tricks, or, I'll never learn. But those are just the stories we tell ourselves to keep ourselves stuck. So that's one of the first beliefs I have to change about myself. Remember, we're reprogramming. So the first belief I have to change about myself is that I can change myself. I can change how I see myself, and I can change who I am in the world.
No, and you'll say you've changed. I've changed too. I know you've mentioned it, and I have. And it's wonderful. And you don't go back to the old ways. So I've changed. It's just something you just got to keep on doing. It's funny. I used to have a saying that I have a difficult time with difficult people. And that's probably more true than I have ever realized, because anybody would have a difficult time with a difficult person. Just learn how to deal with it. And I never took the other step and said, okay, now how do you deal with that? And all your suggestions are there. Have boundaries, or do this, or do that, or do that. We don't have to get into it now. But it's funny how I made that statement, but never went any further with it. Now I can go further with it.
Well, and then what happens? They are no longer difficult people.
Well, they may stay difficult. They may be difficult people.
Yeah,
like
they may
Stan
be.
was.
They may or may not, but we begin to see them differently.
Yes. Yeah.
Because when we change how we see ourselves, we change how we see other people.
Right.
And
we can take care of ourselves.
I suggested that we can begin to see those difficult people as people who are just struggling.
Yeah.
People who are, having a hard time, just like we have from time to time. Doesn't make bad behavior good or right. We're not condoning inappropriate or harmful behavior. None of that. We still do what we need to do to take care of ourselves, and we can begin to have compassion. If somebody has to attack me because of my photos on Facebook, somebody who doesn't even know me or whatever, we're going to probably talk about that next week or the week after, that person's got problems. That person's got issues. And as somebody who has acted out on Facebook, I can see that I have issues. So now all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, so I can almost have compassion and understanding for them because I see myself in that behavior. Now this is huge. And this is one of the major conclusions of this chapter. Until I can see myself and other people, it's very difficult to forgive. And it's very difficult to progress in this lifetime, especially spiritually, which is going to be my next book. So as long as I think that they're different from me, and that I never act the way they act, and I would never do what they're doing, and I judge them and make them wrong for that, I don't really have a chance of having true compassion. I don't really have a chance of true forgiveness of that quality in myself, because as we talked about in chapter 6, the only reason when I see something, and let's put aside for a moment the situation where somebody's actually attacking us, physically or verbally or whatever, but the situation where I'm judging somebody, because of the clothes they wear, or the person they marry, or the person they divorce, or, I have some judgment. And if I'm judging somebody else, and I really feel that I'm so right that they're wrong, it's probably because I have that same trait or characteristic in myself, and I haven't forgiven it in myself. So if I see somebody else as a braggart, they're always bragging and bragging, and it upsets me, and I judge them for that, and I want to make them wrong, and I want to tell everybody what an asshole they are, a-hole they are, because they're bragging all the time. It's probably because that's a part of myself that I haven't accepted, that I haven't healed. Or I might have gone to the other extreme, which is I will never say anything positive about myself, and because I think it's unseemly, but then I'll judge everybody else who does, but I judge them not because what they're doing is bad or wrong, but because it's like, well, how come they get to brag about themselves and I don't? That kind of thing. It's all insanity, But the point is, until I begin to see myself and other people, and to begin to have compassion and understanding for that, and instead of saying, how could you do that? And you know, the full sentence is, how could you do that to me? And then begin to say, well, number one, maybe this is not about me. I don't have to take this personally. Somebody attacking my photos on Facebook who I don't even know. And by the way, it hasn't happened in a long time, and it rarely happens, but I give a couple of examples later in this chapter, so it's I don't want people to think about it. I mean, I actually get so much love and acceptance and appreciation on Facebook and Instagram and all my social media, and I'm very grateful for that. But the point is, it has happened, and by not taking that personally, I have had miraculous outcomes, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of weeks. So that's what we're talking about. So I could either be pissed off, I can be offended, I could say, how could you do that to me? Or I can begin to see the whole thing differently and say, you know, this person is having an issue, and it's got nothing to do with me or my photos or whatever they're attacking. When we do that, everything changes. All right? We may still have boundaries, we may still have dividing lines, we may still do things to keep ourselves, to keep them at bay and all of that. But we don't have to be a victim to do that. We don't have to use anger. You know, the moment, one of the biggest realizations for me has been that I can take care of myself with difficult people without being angry, without attacking them, without being defensive, without trying to hurt them, without trying to get back at them for what I think they did to me. Taking care of myself without any of that. That's where we want to go. And to maybe even have some compassion and understanding. Because when I approach somebody who's attacking me with compassion and understanding, it changes the whole dynamic. And I personally believe this is as true between individuals or neighbors or whatever as it is between nations. I mean, I see this on a global scale. Talk about that another time. So the point is, we can do all of this differently and we'll have a different experience, but it's up to us to change. And it starts and frankly ends, or at least it starts, with how I see myself in that situation. As long as I think somebody else has power over me, as long as I think somebody else's opinion of me is more important than my own opinion of myself, I am powerless to have a different experience. I'm powerless to change how I interact with that person and to move forward in my life. But when I change how I see myself and I stop giving my power away and you know, I approach it from a place of strength rather than weakness, everything changes. And strength is not how hard I can hit that person. That's not strength. Violence is not strength. Violence is an expression of weakness and fear. Compassion, love, understanding, that's strength.
That's very
And
spiritual. You know, that's the whole spiritual sense of what, you know, you could talk about. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've been reading about this stuff in our spiritual texts for centuries.
Yeah.
But who actually does it?
I don't know. You just said it, but who actually does it, I don't know. But, you know,
well, you know, there are people who do this.
Yes, there are.
And both on an individual scale and on a global or national scale. You know, there are examples all over the place of people actually having compassion, being forgiving, and all of that. It's possible to do that.
Yes.
All right, great. Anything else, Barb?
No, thanks a lot. I'm okay.
Awesome. Good job. Dee, you want to chime in on all this?
Yeah, I'd like to just take a couple minutes. Thank you both and everybody so much. You know, Wayne Dyer, and you've said, you know, brought Wayne to the table here several times. He's one of my favorite teachers in this regard about teaching forgiveness. So in my situation, and I'm working with you offline with the names, dates, people and things, the specifics, because of course I can't, post my my dirty laundry on for the world. But what I can do is bring like the overall situation and have it be commented on. I this boundary thing, which I'm fairly good at. I've been through, I guess, lots of opportunity required to learn some boundary setting skills, just to survive really in my family and in my life. So thank you for that. But the forgiveness piece, I haven't, up until this last couple of years, when I found myself in a weakened condition, because I heard you tell Barbara, when we're strong, when we're plumbed up, when we're grounded, that's when we have the ability, the capacity to actually have compassion and maybe find the place of, yes, I have that in me too, and I can be forgiving. I have not been in that place, and that feelings of wanting to annihilate because of the thoughts that I have of egregious behavior. The best that I could do was to remove myself and not repeat the thoughts, because of how upset it makes me to think about the course of events. So I'm in it to the end because I need that forgiveness piece, and I will give a lot of gratitude if and when I can feel strong enough that I could actually get off of the merry-go-round of being like incensed that this could happen, these things could happen to vulnerable people. I think it's a big issue. It's not specific to me. It's a big issue about elder care, abuse and neglect. And I'm not going to talk anymore about that, but I am going to say I missed part of the first part of this this workshop because I had a win. I had a victory. One of my clients allowed me to, they asked for my help a couple of months ago, and I paced myself and waited for the perfect opportunity. And today we had like a 3.5 hour appointment with an integrative doctor. And this is a client who's has the allopathic medicine route failed for them. So it's super exciting that this integrative practitioner could give my client a sense of hope and feeling loved and understood and cared for. Thanks, Pass.
All right, great, beautiful. Just let me reiterate too. It's okay to divorce ourselves from certain people in certain situations. So if the best that I can do is to remove myself, it's not good or bad, it's not right or wrong. We do what we need to do to take care of ourselves, and that's okay. And we're slowly working our way to maybe a different way of interacting in those situations. We're not making excuses for other people's inappropriate behavior, or any of that. And we're slowly moving. And then the other, the forgiveness part of it, that's hard. I'm telling you, I wrote the darn book, and it's still hard for me to go there. So we still have a few more weeks to integrate all of that. So that was great. Thank you, Dee Dee. So
Thanks, Peter. I'll keep coming back. Thank you.
Awesome. So we're kind of over time. So I'm going to play the song one more time, 3.5 minutes this time. We'll come back and say our final goodbyes. All right, guys, so that's it for this week. Thanks again for being here. A few more weeks, and then we're going to wrap it up. And the best is yet to come. I think the last few workshops are going to be really powerful for all of us. So anybody want to say anything?
Well, I don't know how it can get any more powerful, but I will keep coming back. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Dee Dee.
Yes, Peter, thanks a lot. It's unbelievable how it's really developing. So thank you. And it's nice to do it together. And good night.
Great. Thanks, Barb. So guys, remember, be bigger than you think you are today and every day. And I want to hear all about your victories next week. Have a great week.